right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Ask Octopus, where we answer your interesting questions we get from customers or community. I'm Ryan, and I've got Derek and Bob with me today. How are you guys doing?
Fantastic. How are you doing today?
And I'm good.
I'm awesome. It's Friday. It's permanently Friday. Sessions that we do.
Permanently Friday. We record on Fridays, so it's always, especially for Derek. Derek's out of here after this, which everybody, any regular viewers know that. You can see that he's halfway out the door already.
That's why we always chat longer and longer for each one of these videos as they go on. So it just forces Derek to stay later and later.
That's right. You can tell what order they've been recorded in.
It's just like slowly.
Yeah.
All right, guys. I've got an interesting question, but it was one that was a little bit confusing, and even like the answer, it's like there wasn't like. I've got an answer for how it works, but it's still something that I've seen that comes up in the community, and I've had to do a lot of testing just to like verify that I have my understanding of it correctly. And the question is, how does target role scoping work? So this is if I have multiple roles on a target and I want to use a deployment step to target multiple roles, or to use a variable that targets both of those roles. And it really comes around, usually the question is formed with, I've scoped this variable to 2 roles. My target has both these roles. How come I'm not getting the results that I expect? And I've seen this, I think I've seen this in Stack Overflow. I've seen it in the community a few times. So I've got a example that we can walk through that will hopefully make it a little more clear as to what's happening and give some tips on how to avoid the undesired behavior. And, oh man, I think I'm missing a link. Let me grab that real quick, because I had in our docs, we have a pretty good, yeah, here it is. I don't know how I lost that. No, it's here. Okay. Ignore the false link. It was right there the whole time. I thought that was my variables on my project. So on the for the deployment process, the variables page in our docs, we have this section about scope specificity, which is really great because it actually goes through the like order of precedence for the different variable scoping rules, and it goes from like most specific to least specific. So if you scope a variable to a step or action, it will use that. And then it goes, okay, well, is there anything scoped to this machine specifically? And then we get into kind of rules and tenet tags. And these are kind of like a special, not really a special case, but they're different from the first 2 and some of the ones at the end, where even if you scope a variable to a step or a machine, it really only applies to like one thing at a time. You're not going to have you're not going to try and figure out the variable, like you're only running one step at a time. So whatever variable is assigned to that step is going to work. This step is, even though it's running on multiple machines at a time, it's going to be running on that machine. So if it's scoped to that machine, it makes sense. But you can have multiple roles scoped to a machine. So that's kind of where it gets, I think some of the confusion comes from, like which role is applying, which scoping is applying. And I didn't actually know until I read this last week. 3 and 4, it's got roles specified twice. So if you have a role applied to the current machine and it's targeted by the step, that's actually a higher precedence than all the other roles, which makes sense. If I'm deploying to web server and I have a variable, or I'm deploying to a target that has the web server role and I've got a variable for web server, it should use that variable. But also, if say maybe I don't have anything scoped to that role, it will use, if I have a variable scoped to a different role that's on the same target, even though it wasn't mentioned in the step definition, it will apply that variable, which I think makes sense. That's probably like a good way to add some extra information into your deployment targets. But so this is a good resource if you want to go in and actually see the precedents. And there's one section at the bottom that's very important where it says if 2 roles are scoped equally, it's going to do the order of preference. It's going to choose project defined variables over library set defined ones. But if it can't resolve a conflict, like if you have 2 roles that are equally applied, it's non-deterministic. it means you can't count on the scoping to give you the value you want or even the same value each time.
So it's not even alphabetical in that sense?
I'm not sure how it works underneath the hood. From my testing, it didn't look like it was alphabetical. It might have been, but I'm getting like, even then I was like, well, maybe it depends on the order you applied the role. Maybe it depends on the order that the variable is in the variable set. But even then I wasn't getting results that where I could discern like a pattern. And maybe one of you will see it, but I couldn't see it. So I'm going to jump into my example here, and I've just got two targets. They're cloud targets for simplicity. They're both in the dev environment, and you see they each have two roles. So I've got both of them tagged as web server, and one is running an admin site, and one is tagged as a reporting site.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of where the similar scenario I've seen in questions come up. So if we go and look at my project, let's look at the variables first. So you can see I even got some extra wildcard variables thrown in, but I've got one variable for site path. And I started with the two values on the bottom. If I'm deploying to admin site or web server, I want to use /admin. And if I'm deploying to reporting site or web server, it's reports.
Mm-hmm.
And the confusion comes in, a lot of people expect this to be an and. I'm deploying to admin site and web server, but that's not how it works. And I even threw in a couple extra variables. Okay, what happens if I have another value that's scoped directly to reporting site? And what if I have another value scoped directly to web server? How will that affect my test? And it turns out these didn't affect my test at all, but I think that comes down to it being non-deterministic when it finds these conflicts, because technically reports 3 is scoped to both of these. It's the same scope level, because web servers across all 3, is going to pick one of those 3 values if I'm deploying directly to web server. And if we go into my process,
because that's what I get. I mean, I remember talking to a customer, and I actually had this misunderstanding as well, where, so I see right there where it says it's going to go, where it says admin site and web server. I'm thinking it's basically, it's looking for servers that only have both of those roles, where in fact it's an or in that sense.
Right, it's going to deploy to targets that are admin site or web server, which in my case would be both of my targets because they both have web server.
Yes.
And then it's going to, and then this is even, I think, even more into that, well, how do you evaluate the variables? Because if I'm deploying to the one that has both roles, which role is it using when it's determining which variable to use? And like I said, I haven't looked into the code of how it evaluates it. But yeah, to walk through these, so I've got 8 steps. So 1, 2, and it's a set of 4. So one's just going to write the target name to show what target it's running on, and the other's going to write the variable value, which I guess I could have put those into one step, but so it's going to use both roles, admin site and web server. And then I've got one that's just going to run against web server, one that's going to run against admin site, and one that's going to run against reporting site. And then we could make some guesses on what you may think the values of each of these are, but man, I couldn't guess. So
yeah, this is one of those, you need to set it up and test it like this, because I'm in the same boat as you. I'm like, oh.
Yep. And it's like, I wasn't even sure. I'm like, is it going to be the same value every time? Like, if it's non-deterministic, it could be random. So, and that's the problem with random. You don't really know if it is or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I like that documentation that said, do your best not to do that, basically.
Yeah. So if we get into tips on like how to avoid this, I would just say, don't use multiple roles like that. Don't try and combine roles to represent one thing. If you're going to do that, combine the naming. And usually what I see is this is kind of like where you've got more generic roles, like something like web server is pretty generic. I would combine those into like product name dash reporting site or product name dash admin site, and just know that's a web server. The web server generic role is pretty good if you want to run some kind of like maintenance jobs on it, to where it's like all my web servers go through and clean up like my ASP.NET cache or something, temporary files, go clean up some stuff on my web servers, but I wouldn't use it for deploying specific applications.
Absolutely, I agree.
All
Yeah,
right.
'cause it's funny because I've done this. The key is to test it because I've accidentally deployed to a different, completely on something that was completely not part of what I was trying to deploy to because I'd set something correct up. So I've been there myself in the past. You accidentally, you go in and you put everything, you tag everything as web server, that is a web server, and then suddenly you're like, man, I've just deployed that to a whole bunch of servers that I didn't mean to.
I didn't mean that web server. I meant that web server.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't really like the idea of for doing generic targets like say web server for specific applications because and I think that would work out initially, especially for like proof of concepts if you only have one web server. But if you ever need to split out your server or to handle different apps or anything like that, you're just asking for a world of hurt at that point.
Yeah.
It's a fine balance, I find, because
Yeah.
you want something that is descriptive, that does pin it in, but you don't want every single one, like OctoFX-web1
Yeah.
land up with these huge naming conventions as well. So it is a fine balance, I find.
Yeah, definitely. I like generic ones will work. Generic roles will work, especially if you're a small team, you don't expect to add, like you're going to have one project, two projects, they're all going to share infrastructure. And if that's never going to change, then you're never going to run into problems. But as soon as you split your websites across multiple boxes or you have a new team comes on and they're also deploying websites to the same environment, I think that's where you see a lot of people that do project named environments like project 1-dev, project 2-dev is because a new team comes on and they're like, well, we have web servers too. The original team's like, well, you can't use the web server role because then you would deploy your application to our targets. So they have to create their own dev environment and they use that same generic role. Where if you use a more specific one of like or product 2 or team 2-web, you can avoid some of those issues.
Yeah,
and
then there's also spaces as well.
Yeah.
As once that grows, then there's justification there to throw all this into different spaces as well.
Yeah, Spaces is a good solution to that as well.
And each like deployment target can have 1 to n number of roles. You're not limited to 1 or 2. You can have as many as you'd like. I mean, if you do have 50 roles on a machine, maybe you're hosting too many things on a single box. That might be a single point of failure, but that's up to you if you want to roll that way. If that may work out great in dev and test because you don't have a lot of load at that point.
Yeah, like Derek said, I think there is a balance because if you're going the microservices route and you have 50 app services,
Totally.
do you want 50 targets on one role or 50 roles on one target? Probably not, but as soon as you need to split those out, you're going to need those separate roles. So maybe there's a mid-level grouping you can do, but I think some specificity is going to be better than a generic app server or microservice server or something like that.
Derek, you hit the nail on the head. Don't have it like OctoFX-web-0-1-test, nothing like that.
Yeah.
That's hard to keep track. I mean, that's way too specific.
Yeah, and that's where some of the other
scoping.
Yeah, some of the other scoping comes in value there because you can scope things to specific targets if you need to.
Yeah,
right.
And that might be what they're trying to do with their customer. They're trying to scope to a specific target for that variable. But
it could be. Let's look at some of these results and just see how this worked out. So you'll see for the first two, we're deploying to both targets. So kind of like what we said, because it's not an and, it's an or, is going to deploy because the first one was, I'm going to deploy to my admin site and web server. Well, because web server's in there and it's applied to both targets, it's deploying to both targets. Same thing for writing to the web server only. It's deploying to both of those. And then you see, okay, well, if we deploy to admin site only and reporting site only, it's deploying to the targets we expect. So no surprise there. Go back to the summary. Now, this is where we get into the confusion and the problems that people see. Right site path. So this should be admin, like in our perfect world and like what we want it to be. It should be admin if we're deploying to the admin target. It should be reporting or reports if we're deploying to the reporting target. But what we actually see in this case, it is admin for both. And that's because it's using that web server scoping. Web server is scoped to a variable value that's admin. It's also scoped to one that's reports. It's also scoped to one that's like reports 2 or reports 3. Because there's a conflict, Octopus is picking one, it's non-deterministic, and you're not getting the result you want. And similarly, it actually picked admin for all the cases where I thought it may pick something different. So it's like admin. If we're going to web server only, it's admin. So anytime like I think web server's in play, it's just picking admin. Which, Bob, to your point, it could be alphabetical.
Can be alphabetical on the roll.
Alphabetical on the roll could be. But you see if we're deploying to the specific roles, it is using the correct one. So that's how you would solve that problem, is you wouldn't deploy to both roles trying to say, I want to map to a single target that has both of these roles. You would map to, or you would deploy to a target role that is on the ones you want, a single role that is on the targets you want.
Yeah, I think so. I think three and 4 is definitely the way to go.
Yes. Yeah. So this is what you would expect.
Yeah.
Or even you could say, I want to deploy this to all web servers, but if you want the variable to be different to different targets, you could do your scoping to where you don't have any variable scoped to web server, but you have them scoped to admin site or reporting site.
Yeah.
So you can say,
that's a good point.
Deploy this to everything in web servers, and then you can have different values if you're using some secondary roles and not scoping to the primary role. So that's that number 4 in the specificity on the documentation. So another way to get around that. So yeah, I've seen that come up a few times. So I wanted to like put it together an example and look at how that interacts, how it's set up in the docs, and explaining that. And hopefully this will help people determine what roles in their tagging strategy in the future to avoid any potential issues.
Nice.
All right. Well, that is, for me, that is probably a pretty long explanation of target role scoping. But if you have more questions on that, you feel free to reach out to us, ask us another question or any unrelated question. You can go to hello.octopus.com/askoctopus. If you have an issue or you're running into something and you'd like more information, you can email us at support@octopus.com, and our support team will get back to you, and you may see that answer on a future video. And also join us on Slack. We have a great community there. You can go to octopus.com/Slack and sign up and communicate with us and hang out and chat. All right. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Bob, for going through that with me.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. That was good.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining.